Go, Michael Feinberg.
And there it goes. Okay, pop up the chat.
Two. What later?
I think I can zoom in just one more slot there. Maybe one more? Yeah, there we go. Just trying to make it as legible as possible for people that might have small screens.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's good to be back together again to do a little Torah study. Let's give it a couple more seconds.
Such is the story.
As people log in.
What verse are we starting with?
We're going to be starting with verse 4.
Okay, right. Right. First time Adonai is mentioned.
And more importantly, the breakdown in Jewish thought is that, oh, come on, where's my mouse? That the first 3 verses of chapter 2 are not actually part of chapter 2 in our opinion. Right? Chapter 2 is continuing with the 7th day.
Right.
Talking about it as being the completion of creation.
Right.
But that does not seem to follow on well enough for the original Christian dividers of our chapters. Oops. And it just jumped on me. Sorry. Sometimes Safaria does that. Does not seem to follow on well enough from the 6th day, which is the end of chapter 1. But for anybody that's been part of a Simchat Torah celebration, you'll know that we read all the way up through verse 3 as being the Maaseh Bereishot, as being the story of creation. And so we'll be picking it up on verse 4. All right. Well, I think we've given a reasonable cushion. Don't want to habituate people to showing up late. So let's go ahead and get down to work. A reminder, as always, since it's been a few weeks because of the holidays, that you are welcome to type questions in YouTube, and I'll answer them as soon as I can, but there is a little bit of a time delay. And so if it seems like I've ignored you, it's just because I probably haven't seen it yet. Or I may be in the middle of talking and need to finish the sentence before I can get around to answering it. But don't hesitate to type in your questions. If you are in the Zoom call, please feel free to unmute, and you can either use the official raise your hand symbol or just start asking whenever I take a breath, and I'll be happy to try and work this out. And we just need to be patient with each other using the technology in this way. But the back and forth of study is very important. This is not meant to be a straight lecture. So please feel free to share your comments and share your questions through whichever medium you are most comfortable. It is time for Bereishot, however. It is time for the beginning. Every year we loop back around and begin the story, and every year we find something in the story that is different and needs to be shared that we did not perhaps get to share in the previous year. Each one of us has these reflections, and thus we add them together to make our combined understanding grow. Now, I have the privilege of being the one with the computer that is running the software, which means I get to sort of steer the conversation for today. But this is hopefully something you'll see as being part of the collaborative process of learning Torah. So let's go ahead and get down to work. We are in Genesis 2, chapter 2 and verse 4, and we are picking up with such a story of heaven and earth when they were created. Now, before we go even any further, I just want to draw your attention to the Hebrew at the start of this verse, which may look a little bit more familiar. Ele toldot. Toldot is usually translated better as generations, meaning the progeny. The so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. So we get the toldot of Noach, we get the toldot of Adam, we get the toldot of Abraham, we get the toldot of Isaac. We get the lineage, meaning the days, the lives, the story, hence the translation, of different characters. But this is where we see the days and lives, the story, the generations of heaven and earth. Right? So this is pointing out that we all come from heaven and earth, and we are its descendants. We are the ones that come from it. And this is going to show how that unfolds. Before we go any further, I also need to point out that there is some controversy, unnecessary, but it still at least brings our attention to some of the intricacies of the text, that chapter 2 appears to be a, quote, retelling of an alternative version of creation. Indeed, there are many people who have thrown around the idea that chapter 1 was written by a different person than chapter 2. That is entirely unnecessary as an explanation for why chapter 2 will seem to retread some of the material of chapter 1. Chapter 2 is instead better understood as being an in-depth flashback to the story that is found in chapter 1, meaning that chapter 1 was sort of the bird's eye view, the overview of all of the days of creation, the different segments of the world coming into sharper focus and order. Chapter 2, on the other hand, is going to zoom us back in to one of the episodes that was found within chapter 1. Not just the creation of the world, but in particular, we are aiming it so that we will see the creation of the world vis-a-vis its relationship to humanity. In chapter 1, we were not the star by any stretch of the imagination. In chapter 2, we are going to see how creation unfolded in a way that relates more directly to us. This is a pattern that is repeated throughout the entire Torah, meaning that the Torah will often give us a broad view of a particular situation, time period, event, story, and then we'll zoom back in and retell the story in a way that is most appropriate or clarifying for the focus from which the Torah will go forward. So we'll hear about many people and then focus on Noah. We'll hear about many people and deeds and then focus on Abraham. We'll hear about all of his sons and then focus on Isaac, and so on and so forth. We do this broad and then focus, broad and then focus. So it's not that surprising that it happens here at the beginning of Genesis as well. Without further interruption from myself, we are going to continue now with that unfolding. When the Lord God made earth and heaven, when no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grass of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil. So, as you can see, we are now focusing on this with regards to Adam. I have to repeat again that the good English word man has two meanings in classical English. One is a person of the male gender, and the other, of course, is the shorthand version of a human. In this particular case, whenever we see the word Adam in the Hebrew, we should be thinking of that second meaning humanity. That is what Adam means in biblical Hebrew. There are many other words for man or that which is masculine, and Adam is not it. Yes, it does get conjugated as a male noun, but that does not mean that it has a purely male aspect to it. So wherever you see the word man in this translation, please substitute the word human. It's important to remind ourselves that man is the cousin in the literary understanding of the word Adama, Adam, Adama, man and earth, man and soil. They are linked together because it is from the soil that we were made, as we're going to see in a repeat in just a second of the earlier teaching in chapter 1. But a flow would well up from the ground and water the whole surface of the earth. Right? There wasn't rain. There was instead this unusual sort of pre-rain cycle watering. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils and breathed, and the breath of life, and man became a living being. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east and placed there the man whom he had formed. And from the ground, the Lord God caused to grow every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. We've talked about that in previous classes. That's not going to be our focus today. A river issues from Eden to water the garden, and it then divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is Pishon, the one that winds through the whole land of Havilah, where the gold is. The gold of that land is good. Bdellium is there, and lapis lazuli. The name of the second river is Gihon, and that one winds through the whole land of Cush. The name of the third rivers is Tigris. Well, at least that is the name that they are trying to give it. It's Hidekel, but they ascribe it to being the Tigris, the translator, the one that flows out of Ashur, and the fourth river is the Euphrates, also known as Frat, which is linked linguistically to the word Euphrates. All right, so everyone with us so far? We've got this new creation. We've got a garden. God has made humanity and then put that person in the garden, that human in the garden, and that garden is watered by these rivers. Questions, comments? Good. Okay. Verse 15. The Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. Okay, so the word that is used for till is not the Hebrew word for plowing. And the word that's used for tend, well, it's not exactly the exact word that's used for tending to like a vineyard or some other type of garden. Instead, if you look at the Hebrew directly, let me just scroll back up so you can see it more clearly. We have our double verbs here at the end, ovda, ul shomra, right? So ovda, does that sound familiar to anyone? These are quite common Hebrew verbs, unlike the Hebrew word for plowing or tending to a vineyard.
Avod, as in work.
Avod, as in work, right? As in avodah, or also the word eved, meaning used as a worker or a servant of some kind. And shomra?
Guardian.
Guardian, all right, right? So shomra is the word for a shomer, right? We also talk about shmirat Shabbat, about being a guardian of Shabbat. So it really would be more literal, which, as you all know, is not, but it will certainly help us understand the discussion in our commentaries. It would be more literal to say that God placed the human there to work it, because the pronominal suffix there is telling us that we are supposed to be working it, meaning the garden, and to guard it or watch it. Now, that hopefully is much less clear than the phrase to till it and tend it. Right? So again, the reminder that you should always have in your mind that the translation is somebody's interpretation, intending to take what may be ambiguous in the Hebrew and to make it clear for an English reader. And that is a great goal. However, sometimes they make it so clear that you don't realize that their explanation is only one of many options of what those two words might mean. Yes, question.
Question, does our tradition give us any idea of how big the garden was?
In midrashic terms, certainly. In literal terms, no. So, we don't usually view the Garden of Eden as being necessarily a physical, literal place that is on the map, which is unusual given that it also has certain rivers being attributed to it. However, there's never been the fascination within Judaism of tracking down the Garden of Eden, the same way that there was within the Christian European tradition. So we don't get too much into an attempt to be a geographer when it comes to the Garden of Eden. Instead, we use this whole section as a spiritual guide rather than a geographical one.
Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rabbi, one question.
Yes.
Where do they say that the garden was placed? Was that, some people say North Africa, some people say, around the Middle East? I'm not even sure. I mean, I wasn't sure what the...
So that's our difficulty, right? If we scroll back up, we get a few clues about where it might be, right? We get the Tigris and Euphrates, if indeed those are the rivers that are being referred to by these things. And that puts it somewhere in the fertile crescent of the Middle East, either in Syria or some area like that, perhaps even as far north as Turkey, but that would be it. But on the other hand, we also see that the Gihon is being taken through the land of Cush. Now, the land of Cush is usually seen throughout biblical terminology as referring to the area around modern-day Ethiopia. There's no river that goes from the Tigris and Euphrates headwaters anywhere near Ethiopia. That's not on any map of the known world. And of course, trying to identify the Pishon is also a little bit more hotly debated. There is less of a term of exactly, less of agreement of where those might be referring to if they are referring to physical locations. So yes, it is really quite impossible to attach a geographical point for Gan Eden, to think of it as appearing on any map. So it's best not to think of it as being, where is it exactly, but instead to think of it as being, what does it represent exactly?
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, so verse 16. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat. But as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. Okay, questions or comments on that lovely little set of instructions, right? Our first commandment, which is not to eat of every tree that we want, but not to eat from the other tree.
But you could eat from the tree of life?
Well, the tree of life is not even considered to be an option. And there is a great deal of debate among the commentators of whether or not Adam was immortal at this point or not. So some argue that humanity was already mortal, and therefore there was no need for us to gain mortality through the later errors. Others argue that no, we were immortal, and in fact we were immortal, and thus God would not think to tell us not to eat of the tree of life because we've already got immortality. So it doesn't explain directly what our status was with regards to our mortality, but it never explicitly tells us not to eat from the tree of life, nor even when God is expelling us from the garden are we told not to eat of the tree. God is merely saying he doesn't want us to eat of the tree. There's not a clear command, just a concern, if you will, that God seems to express. All right, so what's our job?
Rabbi, it seems implicit in the text that we have free will. And so then it becomes our job to distinguish, to make choices.
Right. So indeed, giving a command to a robot is a very different concept than giving a command to something with free will. So we can see, though, that we have free will because we eventually disobey this command. So therefore, when God is commanding us of what trees we can and can't eat, clearly God has already given us free will to either follow that command or not follow that command. We, of course, know how the story ends, so I'm sorry if anybody's getting a spoiler here. We know that eventually we do break that command. But what is our job? Right? Why do we exist? Why did God make us? Does the text even tell us or give us any hints that we might be able to wonder about?
Well, that goes back to verse 15. With the land, with the garden, to work it and to guard it. So we're somehow, that implies that we're partners with God in the created world. The shomer, the guarding part, to me anyway.
So we're said to guard, but we're guarding the garden from what? And if we are working the garden, does that mean that we are like laboring? Does this mean that there was hard work? I know most people, when they think of the Garden of Eden, imagine themselves sitting in the shade of a tree and just, not having to lift a finger. But this tells us that we are working in the garden. So it is ambiguous of what exactly we are meant to do. Again, not to shame the JPS translators, but as soon as they call it tilling and tending, it makes it sound very much like it's just routine farm work. And yet that is not quite what the content says by itself. To make matters worse, if we were to say that it is just routine gardening, then what are we to make of Genesis 3? And Genesis 3 is where we eat from the fruit and God gets rather upset and God starts handing out punishments. And if we look at verse 16, we see that the punishment that is directed towards the woman, Chava, as she will be known, is as follows. And to the woman he said, I will make most severe your pangs in childbearing, and in pain you shall bear children. Yet your urge shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. It's a whole nother world of commentary on that. I should point out that anybody who thinks this implies that a husband gets to order his wife to do whatever he wants does not understand what Judaism understands from this verse. This is more about the idea that despite the first half of the sentence, that a woman will still end up having desires and willingly being with her husband, even though that means she's going to have more children, which will cause more of the severe pangs and suffering. But verse 17 is the one that we need to see about our work, because to Adam he said, because you did as your wife said and ate of the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed be the ground because of you. By toil you shall eat it all the days of your life. As often happens, let me just finish it up. Thorns and thistles shall it sprout for you, but your food shall be the grasses of the field. By the sweat of your brow, ground. For from it you were taken, and dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Again, this is sort of the idea that at this point, humans were not immortal, and then they are now being told that they are going to be mortal, or it could be simply pointing out, this is what's going to happen, and it was always going to happen, and the first half is the only punishment that is being meted out. But something that often gets lost in the translation, this one in particular, and I looked far and wide to see if any of the translations in Sepharia did a better job of this, is that the word that's used for the suffering, the pangs, the pain, first of all, the word for pang and pain are the same root, right? Be'etzev and utzbonech. right? The root is the same for both of those, as is also when we get the punishment for humanity as a whole. Be'itzavon is the same word that's being used for our toil. So the word for pang, pain, and toil are basically all synonymous. And yet the translator used 3 different words for all of them. I don't know if anyone has another translation that tries to see how they're all being proportional and measured, that are being spread throughout these 3. But the upshot that I wanted to draw your attention to is, if we were to use our translator's definition of till and tend it back in chapter 2, verse 15, then what are we to make of verse 17, where now we are being told we have to work the ground?
I have the Fox translation actually does a nice job. I'll pick up in the middle of 17. Well, to Adam, he said, because you have hearkened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you are not to eat from it, damned be the soil on your account. With painstaking labor shall you eat from it. So,
so again, he's doing a good job of trying to channel the general understanding, which is that this is about some form of labor, but at least he is capturing the pain term, which appears doubly in verse 16.
That eats, correct?
What's that? And eats, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So everyone always gets the word eat right, but no one gets the word pain right. They always use it as the word toil. And personally, I think that that's because they're generally pre-translating our phrase back in verse 2 of work as also being some form of farm labor. However, what if we try to understand it in a different way? So that's what we're going to work on for the rest of our class. So let's go ahead and jump into our translation. Our commentary, although these are all translations, I should point out. None of these works were written originally in English, and see how it might be understood throughout the ages. So first we'll start with Ibn Ezra, who starts with a fairly mundane interpretation. The meaning of to work it is to provide water for the garden, right? After all, we saw in the earliest verses of chapter 2 that there wasn't rain yet, and that it was a river valley, if you will. Therefore, what work would humanity be doing? Humanity would be taking the water from the river and be using it to make sure that Gan Eden did not go dry, that there was work to be done by humanity to make sure that the water would stay properly, so that the garden would stay properly watered.
One question in regards to that, Rabbi, I did read that it said that there was no rain. Do you know when in the Bible it said anything about starting the rain?
So the rain definitely starts in the overall creation arc in chapter 1, talking about how God separated the waters above from the waters below. And if the waters above, of course, that become what we call rain. So we don't have it as a zoomed in version because it's not the focus of the story, but we do have the general version that, yes, by the time creation was done, by the time humans were humans, eventually the rains were going.
That would make sense, because then he can work the land, because you had the rain to nourish it and everything. So it makes sense. Okay, right. Thank you.
And to guard it, Ibn Ezra says, from animals, and to ensure that they do not enter the garden and sully it. So you may have noticed that God describes the life to Adam, to the humans, right? That we are eating trees. And that's our main focus. And then only later in verse 19 do we get a discussion about the other animals. And then what Ibn Ezra is saying is basically that there was a core garden that was animal free. Now, that may sound weird to us in the modern world who have a different relationship with the natural world. But in the ancient world, animals, wild animals, were quite a pain. I would compare this very closely. If you lived up in Baltimore, certainly when I was there, people with large gardens were constantly struggling to keep the deer from eating their gardens. It was a major point of contention by people who lived in that area. Down here, maybe occasionally you'll see a bear. Occasionally you might have some trouble from a possum or a raccoon. But wild animals of a much more dangerous sort were very common in the ancient world and would also come and uproot or eat things that were meant to be kept in better shape. So Ibn Ezra views this as being what man's work was. He just had to water things and he just had to keep the animals out. It's what you might call a very light duty, but it is still a physical type of labor. Radak is going to take a slightly different point, right? Even though we have been told already in verse 8 that God placed Adam in Gan Eden, the Torah repeats this by stating that God took man in the main verse that we are focusing on. Because at this point, the Torah wanted to inform us of the commandment which accompanied Adam's taking up residence in this idyllic place. Our verse also spells out something that had not been mentioned previously, that Adam was not to treat Gan Eden as a retreat, but that he was made responsible for maintaining it in good order, right? So he's saying, why mention that God took us to this place? Well, it's because it was going to emphasize our job and the purpose for us having been taken there, right? The purpose was not just that we could sit back and enjoy. The purpose was also that we had a job, our work and our guardianship of this area, which was to maintain it in good order. It's a very powerful message that I think still resonates to this day. Before we go on to Or HaChaim, which is going to move us into a more non-literal understanding, or at least move us towards that. Any questions so far on Ibn Ezra or Radak? Okay. So Or HaChaim, to work it and guard it, are two words of discussion. The plain meaning of the verse appears to be that the garden was in need of someone to work it and guard it. Whereas the truth is, this was not the case, right? It looks like when you first read it, okay, there must have been a job to do. And indeed, he would have disagreed with Radak and Ibn Ezra that we had a job to do that was necessary. Whether or not we were told to do a job is different than whether or not the job we were told to do was essential. He's saying it implies that there must have been some need, that the garden had a need for a person. But why would it need a guard? Who was there to steal from it? Right? Was somebody going to come and take a tree? Also, if the garden needed someone to work it, who has done this chore during the almost 6,000 years that the garden had been unattended? So this is based on off a different midrash, a different understanding, that the garden had stood alone for 6,000 years prior to mankind's creation. And so what he is saying is that, at least according to that midrash, if you needed someone to work the garden, then how was the garden able to work for 6,000 years without a worker? What exactly would the nature of the work which had to be performed, right? So he's asking these all in rhetorical incredulity, saying, look, the garden didn't need anybody. He offers instead, at the time when God placed Adam in Gan Eden, Adam was able to see how his positive actions contributed to the well-being of the garden. Once he had been expelled, he was denied the ability to see the results of his activities. His spiritual part, however, was not denied the chance to accumulate good deeds and to eventually see the results in Olam Haba. So Or HaChaim, in a typical manner for his style of commentary, is saying there was a spiritual lesson that Adam was having in this garden, that as he worked, which wasn't necessary for the garden, but was necessary for him, he would be able to see the benefit, right? If I water, if I tend, if I guard, the garden flourishes and I benefit. He was able to see a very simple one-to-one relationship between his efforts and the productivity that would go with that. Once he had been expelled, he was denied the ability. Now, does that mean that humanity's work in their gardens, in their farms, in their animal husbandry is not apparent to them? No, but it means we can't see the ultimate results of our activities. that there was a spiritual insight that allowed the Adam to understand the fullness of the results of his activity, rather than being more limited to just seeing, I planted a seed, I grew a plant. You would understand that in a much deeper and fuller sense of the entirety of what had been achieved. His spiritual part, however, was not denied the chance to accumulate good deeds, to perform the commandments, and to eventually see the results in Olam Haba. Right? We may not be able to see all the results of the mitzvot we do here, of the good that we do in this life, but eventually we will see that at least. Eventually our eyes, in the spiritual sense, will be opened to the fullness of our accomplishments. So for him to work and to guard it was set up as a means of contrasting that perfect understanding that Adam had of the purpose and fulfillment of his work with our limited understanding of the fullness and eventual results of our work that we have in our modern life. But we still should not doubt neither the purpose nor the ultimate reward that comes from the work that we do. Questions or comments on that? Okay, so we're moving on to Pinine Halacha, which is another commentator, but he was trying to look more at halacha, obviously by the name, at Jewish law, but he would often offer spiritual insights in the process. On Shabbat, even in the Garden of Eden, man was meant to be elevated to the level of cessation of all work, meaning that Shabbat was also a day of no work for us in the garden. You could not have had a day of no work if you'd not had 6 days of work. So the creation of Shabbat in the garden itself implies there was also work that happened in the garden. Yom Tov, though, meaning holiday days, like the festival of Shmini Atzeret or Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot, correspond to the 6 weekdays in the Garden of Eden, right? It's like, well, wait a minute. We also are supposed to relax on Yom Tov. Why would these be corresponding to the 6 weekdays? Well, there is a difference, right? On Yom Tov, we are allowed to do work that is specifically for the nefesh, literally the soul, but is generally understood meaning for doing work that allows us to eat on Yom Tov itself. This is why we are allowed to cook on a holiday, but we are not allowed to cook on Shabbat. God left room for human effort in order to include him in the project of repairing and sustaining the world, right? So the Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till and to tend it. Right? We had a job, and we had something to do in order that we would have that activity, and that this was a gift that God was giving us, that God left room so that our human effort would matter, because that was something that would allow us to join God in that project. The difference, however, between then and now, meaning during the garden time and after the garden time, is that in the Garden of Eden, the work would have been done in a relaxed, joyful way, and its positive work, improving the world, would have been immediately apparent. Again, building off Or HaChaim's understanding. That we would have worked, but work would have been fun. It would have been nice. It would have been pleasant. And part of that, of course, is because we would have seen the immediate result. In our modern world, this is not so easy. Corresponding to this, we may prepare food on Yom Tov, as this work is relatively pleasant and enjoyable. I know that I certainly enjoy, making a dinner a lot more than I do doing work in my own personal garden. One makes me a lot more exhausted compared to the other. And so that's how he is saying the metaphor of Yom Tov as relating to the 6 days, that the 6 days in the garden were to work what the modern Yom Tov is to work in our modern day. Does everyone get his interpretation there? Right? There was work. It was a gift. God left something for us to do because that was good for us. We saw the results, but when we worked, it was relaxed. It was joyful. It was not as strenuous as work would later become. All right. let's take it another step forward. Duties of the heart. Similarly, you will find among human beings character traits and body structures suited for certain businesses or activity, right? Different people are good at different things. One who finds his nature and personality attracted to a certain occupation and his body is suited for it, that he will be able to bear its demands, he should pursue it and make it his means of earning a livelihood, and he should bear its pleasures and pains and not be upset when sometimes his income is withheld. Rather, let him trust in God that he will support him all of his days. And he should have intention when his mind and body is occupied with one of the means of earning a living to fulfill the commandment of the Creator to pursue the means of the world, such as working the land, plowing it, and sowing it, as is written, and God took the man and placed him in Gan Eden to work it and to guard it. So what he is trying to say here is that there is a nobility to work, that when you work according to your ability, your personality, your nature, both physical and mental, psychological, and when you put yourself into it and you see yourself not just as making a livelihood, but instead as fulfilling this part for which we were made, which is to work and to guard the world according to our abilities as we were made, that is a incredibly liberating and spiritually supportive thing, and especially will help us through those moments when perhaps our livelihood is not coming as easily as we might want. That we shouldn't just chase the salary, but instead we should make sure that we are truly working in a way that reflects the meaning of our individual existence, because that was a first clue given to us in the creation of man and his placement in the garden. I'm not a job counselor, but I do find this very inspiring, that when you are thinking about what it is you might want to do, to use this as your frame of reference. And if you feel yourself uncomfortable in your current work, it may be because it does not suit you as well as it should. All right. Oh, question, comment?
I was just thinking, Rabbi, that it reminded this part of the explanation or talk. It reminded me of the several different people who made different things for the Mishkan. You know, and how fascinating it was that here there were slaves with incredible talents and incredible abilities, and they were able to fulfill it. I mean, God gave it to them because it says in the Tanakh, but it is a beautiful thing to see them fulfill, you know, the eventually the whole dream of being able to build the Mishkan, right? If I said it right, and be able to fulfill that part of their life. You know, I always go back to that, how fascinating it was that everybody had a different talent and they brought it and with their own abilities and made it all happen too.
Right, and they still have to choose. You know, whatever talents we may be given, it's like God giving us a seed. If you don't plant it and tend it and grow it, then your talent never fully matures to where it should be. But indeed, the Mishkan could only be built when everybody was willing to contribute what they were best capable of.
Let's hope we get more people to volunteer. Sorry, Rabbi, to volunteer in our Mishkan too.
You know, and people should never be hesitant. If you have a skill with one thing or another, there's always a way for it to be useful to the community. All right. So now we're going to take a look at a rather long section. So please bear with me. This is taken from the 19 Letters, which is a work written by Samuel Raphael Hirsch, who was a great rabbi in the 19th century. It was written in German originally, and so the translation is a little clunky, as German tends to like long sentences and doesn't lend itself to smooth English. However, what he has to say about how we were made and how we work in the world, I think, is very profound. So if you stick with it, I'm sure you'll appreciate the results. Humans, what are they in this God-filled world? What are their place in this throng of creatures, this choir of servants of the Lord, right? The question that we ask ourselves all the time, why are we here? What possible reason can there be for our existence? Though the Torah were silent, meaning if the Torah never even mentioned it, would not the contemplation of creation, would not your own breast tell you, a human being, is he not also a creature of God? Should he not also be a servant of God? Right? So even if the Torah hadn't told you this, that you should be a servant of God, if you had just looked at the world and seen how everything else serves its role, would you not think that you too had a role to serve? Don't you feel it just in your own being that there is a reason for you to exist as a creature of God, and that is to be a servant of God? Now, servant of God, he's going to explain more broadly than just sitting and praying. Every fiber of your body is a creation from the hand of God, formed by him, arranged by him, endowed by him with power. Your spirit, that world of powers, is the creation of God from beginning to end. The divine spark, your personality, which invisible as deity, right? You can't touch your personality and divine spark any more than you could touch God, weaves and works in the microcosm, and under whose control stand intellect and body, and the power to use the entire realm of nature for its purpose. This mysterious spiritual force in you is itself emanation of deity. You are an example of a godly creation, because you can see how both intellect and bodily purpose come together with the spiritual power that allow you to exist. Learn then to deem yourself as holy. Learn them to deem yourself holy as creature of God. All right, so if you look at yourself now as being truly one of God's creatures, then a few other things come into focus. Since all things, the smallest and the greatest, are God's chosen messengers to work, each in its place and with its measure of power, according to the law of the Most High, taking only that which may be given, taking only that it may give again, should man alone be excluded from this circle of blessed activity? Can he be born only to take, to revel in lavish plenty, and to starve in misery, but not to work, not to fill any place nor fulfill any purpose, but to let all end in himself? The world and all in it serves God. Is it conceivable that man alone should only serve himself? No. All right, so just make sure you understand the logic of his argument. You look around at the whole rest of the world and you see the cow eating the grass, and then the cow putting manure back, which fertilizes the grass, and the cow eventually dying and its body becoming the nutrients which create the grass. Right? You can look at the cycle of predator and prey that allows the world to exist in some form of harmony. You look at everything in existence, from the least to the greatest, everything both takes from the world and gives to the world. There is this constant cycle of giving and taking, which allows the world to exist in some balance and harmony. So humans, you have free will, you think about this and have choices. Do you really think you just get to take? Do you really think that you can only take from the world and have no purpose which you need to fulfill, no work that you need to do? All the other things in the world do. You don't? What, you just get to sit back in laziness? Right? No, you do not serve only yourself. He continues, your consciousness pronounces you, as does the Torah, an image of God. It's Tselem Elohim, as we saw in chapter 1 of Genesis. That is what man should be. Right? There is your calling, to be active in a way that is the image of God. Only when working to some end can you know God in love and righteousness. To work to ends of righteousness and love are you called, not merely to enjoy or suffer. Right? Yes, here is the work you are meant to do. Right? The work you are meant to do is to do works of righteousness and love. You do that, and you are living up to the duty that God has given you. Right? All which you possess, spirit, body, human beings, wealth, every ability and every power, they are a means of activity to work and guard, to promote and preserve the world were they given love and righteousness. Right? That's your job. You now have your job description. and you've got the equipment to do it, do it. All forces stand as servitors around the throne of God. Their capacity is hidden from themselves so that they cannot see the reason of their mission, but they feel within them winged power to act and act in accordance with their purpose, right? So gravity doesn't know why it makes objects attracted to each other. The grass doesn't know why it grows. The cow doesn't know why it does what it does. Right? They are just compelled by how they were made to behave in certain ways, whether it be a natural force or a natural creature. And when they do, they are acting in accordance with their purpose. But you, humanity, your capacity is half revealed. You can comprehend yourself as creatures of God, can at least faintly appreciate the notion of the mission which he breathed into your ear. It's just, amazing the way he's trying to draw our attention that unique among all of God's creation, we know we were created. Rabbi Akiva even did say that the greatest gift God made was not just that we were made, but B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, but that God told us we were made in the image of God. And that awareness should therefore inspire us more greatly to serve willingly and with joy and with happiness the function for which we were made, right? To do acts of love, to do acts of righteousness, to act in a way that is in the fulfillment of being made in the image of God. And that can be done in the field, that can be done in an office, that can be done behind the wheel of a car, that can be done inside a home. The work that we do, when it's being driven by this as a purpose, becomes ennobling for us and enriching for the world, and allows us to fulfill our purpose in a way that simply chasing a paycheck or simply worrying about pleasure and suffering can never even come close to matching. Questions or comments?
Rabbi, I'm thinking of the word avocation.
Mm-hmm.
I know it really is about vocation, but it is the idea of an avocation is to acknowledge what is that thing that inspires you and pulls you and draws you to be your best self.
Exactly. And most notably, what Hirsch and the others have been all saying is that it doesn't matter whether you want to be an artist, a doctor, a janitor, a cook, a homemaker, whatever it is you want to do, you can do while still fulfilling the avocation, by still fulfilling your calling to do works of love and righteousness, right? It's your job is not that which pays your salary, right? Sure, that's in quote your job, and that's what you're going to fill out on the tax form. But your actual purpose, your real job, is to live as the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim, and to live in a way with love and righteousness. And that is not dependent upon the particular chosen form of work that you have.
The tales of the Hasidim have lots of examples.
Absolutely, absolutely. And unfortunately, so much of our industrial and post-industrial world has been focused on, what job do you want to be? And you'll ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And usually when people ask that question, what they're asking them is, where do you want to earn your salary? But think how much that question should really mean. What do you want to be when you grow up? Right? It's not about being a particular occupation. It's about who you are in that occupation. And I actually find that most little kids get that. Like when you ask them, what do they want to be? And they say they want to be a firefighter, or they say they want to be a doctor, or they say they want to be a teacher. They're usually never saying that because they want to get the salary that goes with that job. They are usually saying they want to be those things because they see in them something that they feel they can do that would be acts of love and righteousness and good, and they respect the godliness in those jobs that they are listing. But unfortunately, somewhere, I don't know if it's around middle school or perhaps even earlier for some kids, they begin to think that the real question is, how are you going to get your income, and not what kind of person will you be while you do it. All right, well, we will leave that there for today. And I look forward to continuing next week as we deal with mankind not living up to their full potential, because we'll have to deal with the times of Noah and the aftermath. So take care, everyone, and see you next week.
Yes, sir.